Good morning, and you're very welcome to this morning's Signpost webinar. We're at the back end of Hedgerow Week, and I'm joined this morning by Ray Ó Foghlú and Jeremy Turkington from the Hometree Charity. And they're going to be talking to us this morning about growing native trees and hedges from Irish seed. And this is a key issue in relation to our hedgerows and tree planting, with a requirement and a desire to have home produced trees and hedgerow plants available for our, I suppose, scheme work and other planting that we need to be doing. And this has been a major issue in relation to, in particular, the acre scheme, but in general, the availability of seeds and plants has been a major, I suppose, a challenge over the last number of years. So Ray and Jeremy, you're very welcome to the podcast this morning.
Thanks, Brad. Hi, Catherine.
Yeah, sorry, and I suppose maybe a lot of the listeners may not be familiar with the Hometree Charity, and I think you will, in your presentation, you'll kind of give us an insight into the work you do, and before we talk in specific about the growing of native trees.
Yeah, that's right. I'll give a good overview of the charity first, and then Jeremy will get into the details of what we're talking about today.
Very good. Catherine, you've been busy around the country all week with Hedgerow Week, and a number of events already held, and I suppose the last of your 5 Teagasc events on this morning in Kildalton.
Yeah, serious engagement by the people who turn up. I mean, and a huge thirst for knowledge, I think, of understanding, which is fantastic, and just the more we get that out, the better. So the last one this morning, and there's also probably too late for watchers to come, and especially there's a Wild Awake one on in Donegal this morning. But maybe more important for tomorrow, there's two important Hedgerow Week events. Not Teagasc events, but a part of the story. So in Irish Seed Savers from 10 to 1, that's in Clare. Barry O'Loughlin, the Clare Biodiversity Officer, I'll be there, and Katie Smirnova and Eamon McLaughlin. So that's a hedgerow workshop in Irish Seed Savers in Clare tomorrow. So that's not too late. Everybody can go. And also tomorrow in Offaly, there's a hedge laying demonstration by Richard Markham at Mount Briscoe Country House, so from 11 to 1. So there are 2 final important events tomorrow. So if you go on to our website, which is teagasc.ie/hedgerow week, the final events are on there. So, and many thanks to everybody who took part during the week, Pat, and maybe a special mention to the biodiversity officers who we were working with, and they attended the events and really added to them. So it's the beginning of something very special, I think.
The County Council of Biodiversity Officers.
And we have, and they are new. There's one of them in every county now, or nearly one in every. There will be, and I think they're a huge resource to this topic, and we're working closely with them. So yeah.
Okay, so thanks for that, and thanks for the plugs. Ray, if you're ready to roll, we'll start your presentation. I'll remind people that if they have questions for Ray or Jeremy, to put them in the Q&A, and we'll ask them as soon as the presentations are finished. Okay,
that's brilliant, Pat. Hopefully you can all see the screen now.
Perfectly.
Great. So as I said, I'll give a little overview first, and then I'll hand over to Jeremy. But first, maybe we'll introduce ourselves quickly. My name is Ray Ó Foghlú. I'm the development lead here at Hometree Charity. We're based down in Ennisdiamond in West Clare. I'll let Jeremy introduce himself.
I'm Jeremy Turkington. My role here at Hometree is to put together kind of an FRM strategy. I collect the seeds, I coordinate the seed bank, and yeah, I'll talk you through.
So, thanks, Jeremy. So yeah, look, ultimately, the main issue Hometree as a charity seeks to address is biodiversity loss. But we've quite a particular angle on that. I think a lot of listeners will know where we're at in Ireland. 85% of our habitats or designated habitats are in unfavourable condition. We've less than 2% of our native woodlands left. Birds like corncrake, curlew are, on the precipice. So, we really do have difficulties in relation to biodiversity. But I think in terms of what we'd like to think makes us different or unique is that we try to address biodiversity loss in conjunction with community. We have a really strong emphasis on community. I think, a lot of the issues around biodiversity loss aren't necessarily technical. We know how to restore peatlands, we know how to plant hedgerows, we know how to re-wet bogs, but sometimes it can be hard bringing people along on that journey, and that's where we put a lot of emphasis on that human side of it. So that's our mission statement as a charity. But in terms of what we actually do, we bring land into restoration through ownership and through partnership. That is to say, we own land, we own a couple of 100 acres. That's not a big part of our future, but it is a part of our future is land ownership. We see a way bigger part of our future is partnering with existing landowners, primarily in an Irish context, farmers. Very much a science-led organisation, applying an evidence-based approach. In terms of actions, we grow trees. We have a native tree nursery here, the only certified organic one in the country. Jeremy will talk a lot about that later. We plant woodlands, we fence old woodlands, we restore habitats, and we manage habitats. Along the way, we build community, resilience, connection, education, etc. We also advocate and we communicate to as much of an extent as possible, using the media, social media, and other channels. So in terms of that, you see we're based here in Ennisdiamond. So a couple of the original sites we have are down here. We have native woodland sites. We have a continuous cover forestry site. We have our headquarters. But yeah, we've since acquired sites mostly along the west coast. I'll probably talk about the west coast. It's our area of emphasis really as a charity, for various different reasons. This map, I love a good map. The map on the left is productivity of farmland. You see, like on the west coast, it's low productivity farmland, extensive farming. The center map is environmental designations, Natura 2000 designations, again focused heavily on the west. It's where most of our HNV farmland is, and the third map is around rural depopulation. So where there's specific socioeconomic realities apply to the west of Ireland, where the population in all the western counties is still going up. It's quite specific within the county. Some areas are still, you see the furthest out areas, the lightest colour is still depopulating. So these are some of the issues and challenges with the west of Ireland. And opportunities, I would say, in terms of habitat restoration. So this is our headquarters. It's 17 acres, a small suckler farm in the west of Ireland. It had been leased for the last 30 years or so. We picked it up in 2021, and you see the kind of before and after. It's now our headquarters. It's our office space. It's where our nursery is. We've got native woodland scheme plots here. We've got a species-rich meadow on the top hill. But yeah, it's a hive of kind of community activity. Bottom right there is it's our offices and the nursery, which Jeremy again will talk about. So look, we're involved in a lot of stuff. We run an ecology summer school here in the summer. We do a lot of community engagement. We've brought out a few publications. We have a project called Teagasc, which I'm running, which is I suppose it's a cultural project working in the West Coast, where we have researching artists embedded in 6 communities along the West Coast, seeking to understand the challenges faced by these communities and their view on routes forward, rather than us as a charity saying, well, this is what we think you could or should do. So yeah, we're involved in lots of different bits and pieces. We're about habitat restoration, and in the west of Ireland, that can be peatland, it can be woodland, but look, woodland is our primary interest, and particularly these type of woodlands, oceanic woodlands, or temperate rainforests as they're also known, and these are quite unique globally. There's only 8 or 9 places they grow, and we're lucky to have them here on the west coast of Ireland. As listeners will know, the dominant model of forestry in Ireland, we've got just 1.5 to 2% native woodlands. We've got 12% forest cover overall, but most of it is commercial woodlands dominated by Sitka spruce. It's probably around 55% of our total woodland is Sitka spruce, run not on a continuous cover basis, run on, yeah, it's all grown at the same time and felled at the same time in this kind of cyclical process. I suppose in terms of our landscape, our perception is quite skewed. We look at our uplands, and this is common, and we understand this to be natural, but it's not. This is a cultural landscape essentially. Now there would be treeless peatlands in this area, but we know there should also be trees in these upland areas, and there no longer is through historical clearances. We were on a research trip to Scotland last year, and it was interesting to see this railway line cutting through a very similar landscape. And they'd fenced either side of the railway line to stop deer accidents, and you can see the woodlands coming back along the railway line. There's also this one of my favourite images from Clonaglan in South Kerry. You know, and I know some of the farmers here, and they say that trees won't grow here at all. The soil's too thin, or it's too elevated, but you know, the trees will come back if they're given an opportunity or a break to do so. So I suppose I talked about us having two strategies in terms of achieving our ambition of habitat restoration with a focus on woodlands. One is taking land into our own charitable ownership. This is a site we have in Knock-on-Bawn in Galway. It's just shy of 300 acres. It's an upland hill farm. And you can see some of the actions we're taking there: peatland restoration, restoring elements of the river, creating alluvial woodlands, planting woodlands, facilitating natural regeneration. So yeah, I suppose the main, our primary strategy going forward won't be buying land. We don't seek to be a large landowner. We seek to continue forging partnerships with farmers primarily. And we've trialed this model there's been a couple of different iterations. Probably the most successful was the Island Farm Forest EIP, which we ran from 2021 to 2023, and that was run in 5 townlands in West Clare. And I suppose the idea of it was that we believe trees have a role to play on most farms in an integrated fashion, not in a displacing fashion where the trees come in and the farming goes out, but where trees become an aid to better farming. So we worked with 12 farmers. As listeners will know, there's a real challenge with woodland creation in Ireland for lots of different reasons. There's been policy failures that have let farmers down. I think ultimately the system of forestry has encouraged disconnection. The trees come in and farmers tend to not engage after that. They're run by contractors. As I said, it's been a displacing land use. It can be viewed with skepticism. You know, there was a quote from our local pub where, you know, when a farm gets planted, it's discussed in hushed tones, like a death in the community. You know, can symbolize failure. So and we're not as culturally familiar with woodlands as an integral part of farming as they might be in mainland Europe. So the EIP, I suppose the focus again was human. It was about listening and understanding. So we gave a lot of time and resources to engaging with the 12 farmers, hearing their hopes for the future of their farms, what they wanted from their farm. And then we saw where we could fit trees, small scale woodland creation, maybe 250 to 2,000 trees, or large scale, 2 hectares, 5 hectares, 10 hectares. And all the farmers involved engaged in it. We submitted 11 licenses out of the 12 for afforestation, and totaling just shy of 100 acres. So it was a real success. And it's been difficult, I have to say, that it's very slow getting those licenses back, but they've been coming in, and it was a great success, the EAP. We also engaged with school groups and local other stakeholders in the community, and it has since won 2 awards. So I've just 2 slides left before I hand over to Jeremy, and I think myself and Jeremy are keen to kind of get through this so as we can have plenty of time for Q&A at the end. But look, we ultimately, Hometree believe there are a huge amount of benefits to having trees on farms. You know, shelter in winter and summer is going to become more and more of a factor, and there's some pretty good evidence about the benefits of shelter, both in terms of protecting from exposure and protecting from heat. Not that we had to worry about the heat this summer. I think regulatory compliance is a big one, be that space for nature or increasingly water quality. You know, trees as an effective tool, as has been demonstrated by EIPs like the Juhalo one. Perception of farming to the general public, I think, is a big one. You know, trees are a very visual sign of doing the right thing, particularly native trees. I think the huge one for me is farmer well-being in nature. A lot of farmers I know they're nature lovers, and they love having trees on their farm, and they like the feeling of walking through trees or bringing their children or grandchildren into woodlands they've created. And I think it's It's not talked about enough, that element of what woodlands can bring to farmers. Obviously, there's income diversification and tax benefits. I've one slide about that. I think farm management increasingly, particularly in the West, you know, as farmers can't maybe manage out farms as effectively, that woodlands or trees can be a way of making the management of the overall farm easier. And the last one is legacy. I think, you know, I spend a lot of time out in farms. Farmers are proud of the trees they've inherited, and I think would like to think that they could pass trees on to the next generation too. So this picture is a friend of mine, Clive Bright's farm. Most listeners will know Clive Bright, and he said this area of the farm, you can see the rushes and the flag iris, and he said he was sick of bogging the tractor there, so he said, "Feck it, I'm going to fence it off, and I'm going to plant some alder," which he did. And he reckons you can see the grass is growing under the alder now and still not growing under the rushes. He reckons he grazes it twice a year now, and he thinks he gets better grazing now than he used to do before he put the trees in. So there can be, you know, real benefits, and I suppose that's agroforestry. I just wanted to show you these. Creating woodlands needn't be kind of punitive anymore. I think like the 2023 to 2027 forest program is out, and I won't dwell on these because I want to hand over to Jeremy. But you know, there are really good packages in place now. The native tree area scheme is quite lucrative for a small area ground. You know, €22,000 for a hectare over 10 years with no establishment costs borne by the farmer. Agroforestry is a great one in terms of the trees aren't displacing agriculture. You can still farm this land, be that growing vegetables, grazing animals. It's a great option. And then obviously there's the native woodland scheme. Now look, there's another 10 or 12 options here that you can pick from. So yeah, worth there's some good resources online. So that's me, guys. I'm happy to chat at the end.
Hi everyone. I suppose I'll give you a bit of background. It's quite a unique role, so I'll probably give you a bit of background on myself and how I came to my own realizations on the need for better production and systems of production for local provenance or Irish genetic provenance native trees. So and how I've came to be working in a landscape restoration charity on the west coast of Ireland. So I grew up in Tyrone. I was very lucky to know all four of my grandparents. We had farmers and horticulturalists. I knew them, like to know them well, and my sort of interest grew of heritage vegetable crops, heritage apple trees, but also growing native trees on the farm. And I suppose my journey, like professionally, started at Greenmount Agricultural College. I studied a HND in horticulture in 2010, and then I went on and did rural and countryside management there at Greenmount, but with the University of Ulster. And for my dissertation project for that, I decided if I could see if woodland tree cover could be improved in the Ballinderry River catchment, without using any subsidies at all. So basically all just purely me approaching farmers and engaging with them and trying to convince them to plant trees on their farms. I offered them, I said that if they fenced off corners of their farms and along riparian zones, that I would provide the trees. I had a small tree nursery at the time. 2010 was a recession and there was a lot of old building sites, and I was able to talk to those people, talk to forestry and collect regen that was going to be moved, and then I'd move it and plant it on the farm. So that was through pure engagement with the farmers. That was a really good success, and I took from that if you engage with farmers and landowners and give them the right supports, they're more than happy to accommodate trees on their farm. They really just needed someone to help them. And then leading on from that dissertation, I decided that I wanted to try and see how on a catchment scale, using subsidies and using the funds available and working with the farmers, how much woodland cover could I create, just acting as kind of a go-between between the Forest Service and the farmers. So I set up a small little consultancy business, and I basically did all the paperwork for the farmers for the woodland grant scheme. There was a few other options as well, and that was a great success. But that's when I really started to realize, getting involved with contractors and started to see the supply chain of Irish provenance trees. It wasn't where it was very hard to get them. Most trees were imported from Scotland or England. So that's when I really started to twig the ecological value of river catchment scale of collecting local seed. And around that time, there was the Ballinderry Rivers Trust. There's a good friend of mine, Alan Keys, he is an angler. He set up the Ballinderry Rivers Trust to preserve the freshwater pearl mussel. And his strategy was in the same catchment, but he was fencing off rivers to stop cattle going into the river, to stop sedimentation of the pearl mussel beds, with the view to improve the dolphin trout population and the salmon population. And he was just fencing off rivers and planting Viminalis, which is a hybrid willow. So with the discussions with him, we decided that we were going to do like a little schools project with to set up tree nurseries in local schools and collect the local seed from the river catchment. His whole premise was he was trying to preserve the local genetic character of the dolphin trout from Loch Ness and the salmon that went up that system, which I'll not go into the ecology of freshwater pearl mussel, but they only go back to the same river every year, so that was all relevant. He was doing also a fish tank in a classroom, so he was hatching out the baby salmon fry in the fish hatchery. The kids were raising them in the school classroom, and then he was releasing them back into the system, into the rivers with the kids. So we decided to do the same thing with the forest box system, which I'll talk about later, because it's a very efficient way of growing a lot of trees in your own space on your farm. And so we go out, we collect this, we take primary 5 kids out, collect the seeds in local woodlands. We got permission from landowners, and then grew those trees for 2 years in the schools. And then we would bring them back out, and the kids would plant the trees with us. And that was a really lovely way of giving a sense of ownership back to those kids. And like a lot of those kids now, they've gone on to university, they've got married, and some of them have had their own kids, and they still bring their kids back to the farms. And another very interesting thing, that those kids at the time, a lot of farmers were kind of watching and seeing, wondering what was going on, what were we doing, but it was the kids that was bringing that home and explaining to them and bringing them along in the process. And that changed a lot of the perception around the entire project, and it gave us a lot of support. So that was a really valuable lesson for me. But back to the sourcing of genetic provenance trees. I got a job in Clandeboy Estate in County Down, working for TCV, running their tree nursery. And so my job there was we were contract growing for the Northern Ireland Woodland Trust. We were growing Northern Irish, or there's a seed zone in UK forestry, so my temperate seed zone was the whole west of Scotland, all the islands in between, and the whole of Ulster. So that was my zone to collect the seeds from to grow in that nursery. And so we were contract growing for the Woodland Trust, and we were still not able to grow enough trees to fulfill the need, nowhere near enough. So we're still having to import. So that really got me thinking about the need, or addressing a need for the whole island of Ireland, like as an ecological zone, to really focus on setting up the supports and facilities and investment that's needed to be able to be self-sufficient in forest reproductive material as a nation. So that led me on to what Hometree were doing. I worked for our Seed Savers for 5 years and managed the orchards and tree nursery there. That was a real passion of mine, heritage apples. But I knew what Ray and Mitch and Matt were doing. I was following the lads, and I was helping Mitch out along the way, and he was setting up the nursery, so I was giving him a hand along the way with that. And then through various discussions, we said, like, will we go for this? Like, will we really hone in and get a really good strategy for collecting local provenance seed? Ray was doing the Wild Atlantic Rainforest, so it just all kind of aligned and came together, and we said we'd really like to focus seed collection on the west coast of Ireland, grow the trees in our organic tree nursery in Steinman, and supply certified Irish provenance seed for the Rainforest project as kind of a model that other people can replicate. So that was the Wildwood Seed Project, we called it. So in addressing that need, there is a definite shortage of Irish genetic material. We've seen it we've went through gloss, we've been through reps, we're now in acres. It's the same thing every time. We knew we needed 7 million hawthorn for the acre scheme. We only had 1 million available this year in the nursery, so we've had to import the rest. So that's something that we really need to address, and it's probably just through. We've two main suppliers, Quailchin and So Hardy, and then like we have a few up and coming nurseries that are growing enough seed. But it's really down to investment. And my first week as a full-time employee of Hometree, I spent it with Mitch in a shipping container applying for the genetic resource grant aid scheme at the Forest Service, where our ongoing providing it's 20 or 2,500 anyway.
250 first grant, yeah,
250,000, and that's over 4 years. So we applied for the first year, we got 160,000 infrastructure to help us with seed storage facilities, processing equipment, irrigation, basically kit out the nursery for what we need to be a real contender and really make an impact with our supply chain. Our kind of another job is building a strategy for forest reproductive material. Like how are we going to source, basically trace the seed collection from what species we're going to collect, where we're going to collect them, source, trace those. We're hopefully trying to build out a traceability app so we can make traceability from this point of collection right through to where we're planting. So it's really a 10-year strategy from seed collection, 2-year cycle in the nursery, and then we plant most of our stuff will be planted on our restoration sites, and then have like a 7-year establishment plan. So we hope to build out that model that other people can replicate. So the preservation is basically identifying there's 1/5 of 1%, according to Oliver Rackham, of primitive ancient wildwood left, or virgin forest left, in the 20 million acres on the island of Ireland. So basically that is the seed source that we're trying to preserve. That's the genetic character, and a lot of those are on the west coast in the temperate zone that we're trying to grow our trees from to service our own projects within Hometree internally, but also with the view in the future to be able to supply other projects and schemes. So a big part of my job is going out and engaging with landowners, stakeholders, the MPWS. There's a lot of genetic material in our national parks. Engaging with them, getting permission, doing the right paperwork. So that's really where the preservation comes in. We do a bit of grafting as well. So I'm working with Dan Buckley doing an aspen project at the minute. He's building a genetic profile of Irish aspen. So we're involved in a lot of different areas. We're growing 29 species, I think we have in the nursery. So we're growing a big focus on rarer kind of minor species: alder, buckthorn, wych elm, spindle, aspen, things that aren't generally commercially viable, or geldr, things that aren't commercially viable or that are hard to grow, or difficult to propagate at scale. So we're giving a lot of attention to that. The conservation. So basically we're trying to streamline our methods, and we're building out orchards. The nursery is a very good engagement point with people to bring them into Hometree and give them hands-on experience for what we're doing, whether it's seed collecting, seed processing, working in the nursery. There's lots of jobs to do there, so it's a really nice way of showcasing what Hometree do to the wider public or people who want to get engaged. The seed orchards are really useful ways of preserving genetic material, and it's a really we can collect all the material, grow it in our nursery, and then in relatively short space of time we're able to harvest seeds from our nursery, and it reduces the need then to be traveling quite large distances and then collecting from which are fragmented, kind of depleted ecosystems. So that's a quick overview. And utilization, that's our planting at sites. I suppose a lot of our strategy right would be hoping to plant the material that we collect as seed sources. Like natural regeneration is probably the ultimate that we're trying to aim for. Tree planting is an important part. So a lot of the tree saplings that we collect, we will plant them in pockets on our restoration sites on the West Coast, and then with a view to allowing those to establish, and then they become seed sources. A lot of our sites, especially our one in Man, very, very limited seed source of multiple species. So it's important, this work's important to be able to introduce the seed source.
I think so. Like often there's a puritanical view in some circles about natural regeneration, and we as natural regeneration is a huge part of our strategy. But some sites there's literally no seed source, and MAM is a classic example of one of them where we actually feel the need to collect within the catchment of MAM, establish at the site to have any hope that there can be natural regeneration in the next 5 to 10 years.
Yeah. That's some of our minor species that we're growing. There's actually a lot more in addition to that, but these are some of the species that are like quite easy to propagate on a farm. I'll talk some more about that in a bit. Another part of my job is building out, and I'm working with the Woodlands of Ireland on this, and they've built a really good strategy and a network around engaging seed collectors and nurseries and the Forest Service and bringing those together, because that's a vital component that has been really overlooked in Ireland, to actually bring those three components together and make it functional and efficient, because we really need to expand the amount of certified seed collectors. We really need investment in nurseries, and we really need the Forest Service to be efficient and work with us to kind of reduce the bureaucratic burden of all the different FRM legislation and regulations, so we can actually get the work done and get what needs to be done going. Impacts, I've seen a lot. What I suppose myself and Ray, we're in a unique position that we're able to witness changes in people's attitudes and views. So I've noticed I've been in this kind of space for 10 years now. And I've noticed a huge amount of landowners and farmers actually approaching Hometree now to wonder, to learn how to propagate their own trees, how to use their own seeds on their farm. And yeah, we were able to provide some resources and assistance. A lot of them, we have experience weeks. We've had a good number of farmers. Farmers are coming to our volunteer days. So we're really finding that farmers are actually coming to us quite a lot more. Whereas when I started with Hometree, it was Ray just going out and beating that drum at the farmer's door, you know. So there's been a bit of a flip. Like, people are coming to us more to get information, which is great. But barriers and solutions, I mentioned, we have FRM regulations, which is great, but can also be a limitation when the nurseries are actually collecting the seeds within Ireland and have no intention to import. So those are safeguards, but they can be quite burdensome. We'll skip on to questions.
Yeah, so I think one of the things that I think we could probably stop sharing there, Catherine and Pat, is Jeremy in particular, who has the expertise, is happy to talk about what farmers can do on their own land, be it around collection of forest genetic material, which is a clunky enough term for seeds and cuttings and graftings and anything that you can kind of reproduce trees from on your own farm. So perhaps we'll hand back to yourselves, Pat and Catherine, and take it from there.
Okay, listen, thanks very much for really interesting presentations. We've a good few questions coming in, but I suppose one of the big challenges, and you talked about the interest that farmers have, particularly in I suppose developing native woodlands, but we are, I suppose, having challenges in turning that enthusiasm into actual planting of ground. And I suppose maybe it's a too hard a question to answer in a short time, but what are the key issues that we need to face up to try and turn that enthusiasm into action?
So I think we're still in a mindset, Pat, which we need to move on from, and maybe this needs to be reflected in the premiums with further increases. We're still in a mindset of planting the bad land, you know, that we plant the wet field, plant peat or whatever, and that day is over. And so that kind of kills enthusiasm when someone hears something on the radio. Geez, this native tree area scheme sounds great. Could I put it here? You can't. And I don't know how we address that. Do we need to increase the premiums to say we need some of your better land, your mineral soils, etc.? I think another thing that really kills enthusiasm is the delays. As I said, we finished the license submission process for that EIP a year and a half ago, maybe 2 years ago. We're only just now getting some of those permissions back. Look, to be fair, I've had interactions with the Forest Service. They reckon now if your land isn't environmentally sensitive, designated or whatever, they'll come back in 3 months with an answer on your license application. That's critical. It should be like the planning permission system for housing. There's an obligation to hear back in 8 weeks with housing. I think there should be an obligation, because what happens is there's a time and a place where farmers, it might be when they're coming to retirement, etc., where they're thinking, what could I do here? What could I? And you got to capture that positivity at that time. Otherwise it moves on. The land gets leased, the land goes into acres, etc. So we need to capture that sentiment through efficient systems. Look, we need the regulation. That's critical. Like, there's been unfortunate calls for less regulation. We don't need less regulation. We need the regulation to be processed promptly.
Okay, just one thing that struck me as well. You talked a bit about natural regeneration, but you seem, and I'm not sure how successful natural regeneration has been in a few places that's been tried. It's probably had a very narrow range of diversity. You seem to be talking about an assisted natural regeneration, which seems like a very good idea.
Yeah, and it's really an accelerated one. I suppose a good example is our site in Man. There's very species poor in terms of trees. So the genetic character of trees always follows river catchments. George Pettican and Oliver Rackham often talked about that. So ideally we break it down and we'd collect, I think there's 48 river catchments on the island of Ireland. So ideally there's a tree nursery in every single one of those river catchments. In relation to our sites, where they're quite strategically placed, so we collect in those catchments where our sites are, and then we will grow them in a nursery in Ennistimon, but we bring them back up there. And then where we see gaps where there should be tree or species up there, we'll find those probably from the nearest source or closest source we can, and we'll reintroduce those as well.
Okay.
Like a few of my own thoughts on natural regeneration, Pat. I think if you saw the last statistics from the National Forest Inventory, actually half of the woodlands created in the last term of the National Forestry Inventory were created through natural regeneration. It's actually delivering a lot of our woodlands as we speak, and we really could use it to deliver more. But that's not a case of abandonment, rewilding, turning. If we take our eye off it, you could end up with a field of cherry laurel or rhododendron. It still is a managed process. And as Jeremy was saying, there's species that mightn't find their way back, like species that are rarer on our landscape, yew, juniper, aspen, these type of things. So there's still a kind of a human hand needed to guide the process. But I do think we're missing a trick as a state in not maybe formalizing an approach to it. Now, there is one of the forestry schemes, it's NT8, I believe. It's emergent woodlands, does allow for natural regeneration, but it's in my view, it's quite prescriptive. It requires a kind of the canopy to be relatively well established, and the premium is about a third of the premiums for planted woodlands. So no, I really think we need to explore that area more and see it. I often think of this idea of results-based forestry. You know, shouldn't really matter how you get there. If you can hit the markers and say, we've got a native woodlands free of invasive species at 4 years or 6 years, but then you could get a payment. I'd love to see that idea explored a bit more.
Catherine, there's loads of questions coming in.
Yeah, loads of questions. So staying at that high level there, and your comment about the days for planting peat and, you know, the species-rich west grassland are over. But you also mentioned then that woodland is a natural habitat for our uplands. So where do you stand on whether areas of our uplands, should they be fenced off and allowed rewild or plant trees?
Look, what we know from Hometree, even within a single site, there's sensitivities. There's important upland habitats. You know, there's important upland grassland habitats. There's ground nesting birds in our uplands, even though not as many as there should be. So there is sensitivities there. We again, it's not about. It's actually one of the things that frustrates me about land abandonment is the unmanaged nature of it. I'm really up for allowing woodlands to come back in our uplands, but not in an unmanaged way. So I think there are species poor acid grasslands in our uplands, Catherine, that are we know. You know, we probably don't have a natural tree line in Ireland. The tree line in mainland Europe is above 1,000 meters. You know, trees would grow right to the tops of our mountains in many instances. If we allow them now, they might be stunted and sideways or whatever. So again, look, there are habitats in the uplands that need protection, but that doesn't exclude the rightful place of trees in our uplands.
Okay, now coming back to more the planting of the trees and hedges and growing the seed. You mentioned, I think, Jeremy, Salix viminalis. Is that a native Irish species?
No.
That's okay. That's what you meant.
Really well. Yeah, it grows
Sorry.
well here. It was used. It's been used in crafts for weaving, and like I suppose it's like a naturalized species, but it's not considered one of our native species. And it's a useful plant, but the context I was in is like we were using it for conservation. It was actually used to retain banks, like to stop erosion of banks, which it did. But we just wanted to do better and introduce more diversity and good provenance seed there.
I think, Catherine, it's definitely a mistake that, like, through no fault of anyone has made a landowner has good intentions. They say, I'm going to plant trees, but maybe they're not fully aware that, like, I mean, a lot of the more traditional nurseries, you'd struggle to find native species in them. You know, they're a massive minority. A lot of them are cultivars and whatever. So a lot of times trees are planted which maybe aren't as suitable for biodiversity as they could be.
Yeah. And just on the willow there, the Sally, because it grows so easily from slips, is that a difficult one to propagate as for sale? Because I'd love to see more willow. It's superb for biodiversity, but it's impossible to buy it, isn't it? And because it's so easy to grow from a slip, is that the better way to go than getting a nursery? Do you propagate?
From our, like, we suppose we're coming from an ecological angle. You could end up propagating. You're just cloning when you're growing from slips, so you could end up propagating, and willow are male and female as well. So you could end up propagating 1,000 male willow from the same trees, and then it's ecologically it's not really beneficial. Like, so the ideal is you're growing from seed, and then propagation from cuttings. If you do it on your farm on a small scale, I'd try and get at least 10 different trees kind of the same species, and then try and propagate those. But yeah, well, it's such an easy process to grow from cuttings.
That's really useful advice. Yeah, I would have
as a general point, and you might back this up, Jeremy. As a general point, the native willow species tend to have a more rounder top on the leaf, and the non-natives tend to be a thinner, sharper tip to the leaf for people listening in. Would that be correct to say?
Yeah, the osier willow, the viminalis, is very easy to distinguish. It's like you can't really mistake it. But we have 6 native willow species, and then we have Montean dwarf willow species, which we don't really even acknowledge it. So and they're very hard to identify in the wild as well. We've had to get botanists in just so we're like the genetic integrity of what we know, or we can stand over what we're saying is a goat willow or a native willow species, you know. So because they do hybridize quite a lot in the wild. But for generally, like, if you want to grow willow on farms, it supports a lot of biodiversity. So
it can really kickstart, if you're fencing off a waterway and you do have native willow on your farm, it can really kickstart that riverside vegetation process.
Super, but I think you've confirmed to me now that we need to include willow in the seed, collecting the seed and growing it on from the bigger picture. So
we're growing quite a bit of willow here, Catherine. So give us another year or two, and we'll have a load of it for you.
Super. I'll save me going out putting the slips. Do you see any hope for the wild ash? Are you seeing resistant strains? Are you doing any work on propagating that? Coming back to the ash.
In the tree nursery here, like we're not even allowed to move it, so we've just decided we're not going to grow it. But in general, we're in North Clare. I see more resistant, better, more fertile, like alluvial soils. I think it is persisting more. Oliver Rackham said there would, and he wrote a book about this in 2011 before it even hit here. He said there's going to be 15 to 20% resistance, and I suppose I am seeing that, but we should be collecting those seeds and propagating it, or doing something towards it. But it's something if a farmer wants to do. But I've been disheartened more times thinking I've been growing disease resistant ash, and then after 2 years the whole thing just gets flattened with dieback and sapling. So I'm a bit disheartened with it. But once I get my hopes back up again,
we are growing a bit of elm down below, are we? Like, what's your thoughts on that?
We're growing wych elm, and it's from the Ina River here. We're growing it there, and it's flying. But wych elm is generally it's our native elm. It's more resistant to touch elm disease than English elm, or there's a lot of different elm species. But our native wych elm is generally quite resilient, and it grows multi-stem, so the bark beetle, like, it finds it hard to get there, whereas an English elm, it's a big, huge standard tree. It gets to a certain age, and then it gets disease.
A question here, two more, Pat, and then I'll come back to you. But this one is, I suppose, highlighting I don't know, I wouldn't say a conflict, but at least the acknowledgement that there's a difference between production and biodiversity, because somebody is wanting to know, are you doing anything with getting good genetic material now? And their version of good is for production. For example, gather acorns from oak trees that don't sprout as many leaders, and therefore is easier to encourage it to grow straight for good quality wood. Now, obviously, me as a biodiversity expert, I don't mind if it's crooked, but where do you go on that? How much weight do you put to the wood?
Well, Janet, like the trees, like for growing for the Atlantic Rainforest project, if a forester saw some of the hyperoceanic woodlands I was collecting from, like the canopy is sometimes 5 foot tall, very multi-stem. It's just been wind pruned continually. So it's like multi-stem, but I've collected those acorns and grown them inland in good conditions, and they've grown straight timber. So the genetics for straightness, you can't judge them from where you collect them. But I'm not really about oak improvement. It's caused a lot of damage, bringing in tree or genetic material just for straight oaks. So I think we have the potential to have good quality timber, but a lot of it comes down to how the forester grows it themselves, you know.
It's not a focus of ours, Catherine, as you can imagine, as a biodiversity-led organisation. Now, that's not to say, you know, in terms of when we approach farmers, the approach is completely different than it is on our side. Our side is 100% geared or aimed towards biodiversity. With a farm, we're thinking about, God, how can we bring biodiversity onto the farm, but in a way which actually also aids their farm system. So a great example is shelter beds. Like, we planted a couple of them through the EIP, all native species, 2 rows of thorns, 2 rows of fast growing species, 2 rows of slow growing species, about 6 to 8 meters wide. And that's where really you're kind of striking a perfect balance, in my opinion, between bringing biodiversity onto the farm and also giving the farm a tool or a system that's beneficial to them. And this is probably where I have a difficulty with people who advocate over too much for natural regeneration. Farmers need outcomes, you know, like they need outcomes within a defined time period. It won't work for them to fence off an area and for 5 years later to have a little bit of hawthorn scrub coming up through it. It's not good enough, you know. And so a lot of farms, there's a real strong road for planting.
Okay. Look, lots of compliments and asking you to have an East Coast home tree, but let's move on to a practical one. You might help us here with can you explain more about becoming a certified seed collector?
Yeah. If you pass on my email, I'll send you all the details of that. It's a straightforward process of register. There's an application form. You register with the Forest Service, and they give you a code, and then that code, before you go out to collect, you will apply. You'll fill in a seed collection permit application. You send to them 2 weeks before you go out and collect the seeds. They send you back a code, and that code is used then to trace your seed through the nursery until it's saplings, and then you get a master cert. Now you need that master cert if you're going to use those trees in any government scheme. So that's, and if you're going to use your genetic material from your farm, you can do that, but you have to register yourself as a seed collector and be certified.
And I think that could unlock a lot of potential if they could make that, streamline that process, where they could unlock the potential of farmers' own knowledge of seed sources and local seed sources. It does still need to be monitored.
And maybe this will help. Is there a seed collection workshop taking place? Will help those people who want to hear more about what you're saying.
In terms of Hometree, we do have experience weeks and volunteer days, but with the Woodlands of Ireland, I know they're really focusing on. So I would
Woodlands of Ireland.
Get in touch with Joe Garland and ask to be put onto their seed collection network, and they have great events every few months, and they go to nurseries, they go to really cool places. So get involved in that network if you have an interest, and get onto their mailing list. I'd advise you, and that really unlocks a lot of doors for people who are interested as well.
Sorry, just a comment, Pat, before I go back to you there, an important one. Under the EU Habitats Directive, now this is the ones with SSCs and SPAs, just to comment that dry heathlands should not have trees, neither should wet heath and blanket bog. But you were talking about non-designated, I presume, yeah.
Interestingly, Catherine, I saw down in West Cork, I was sad to see over the weekend, some trees from a agri-environmental scheme planted into dry heath. It was very disappointing to see. Like, maybe it's just an innocent mistake anyway.
And just a couple of comments. There was just a comment from Ian Short, just saying that Teagasc has a breeding program for ash, which is focused on trying to overcome dieback. A comment in relation to the bog. Sorry.
A breeding program.
They do. They're having a bit of success, I think. I was down at an open day in Oak Park a month or two ago, and they seem to have a bit of success going.
Just a comment in relation to bogs, in that you do get a degree of natural regeneration in bogs. So is there a middle ground there in terms of the possibilities of there being some trees on bogs? It's just a question.
Yeah, I mean, like, bogs are complex, and there is a type of bog woodland, that occurs in the flushes. Yeah, it's an annexed woodland. It occurs in mineral flushes on. So where there is, and it's a fascinating looking woodland. There is stunted pine trees. You're also seeing, like, a lot of the cutaway bog in the Midlands, which has been cut away back down onto clay, is regenerating primarily with birch, and I don't have a major problem with that because the peat is already gone. I think where the problem is with trees regenerating on deeper peat that's been degraded, and so there is oxygen. There's enough oxygen in the top layer of the peat that the tree roots can actually survive. But these peatlands could, if managed properly, be restored to functional peatland. I think if there's a potential to restore it to functional peatland, it really should be peatland. That's my opinion.
Pat, I have a really important one here because of the Waters EIP we're hearing a lot about at the moment. Design for willow filter beds for clean yard runoff. And would Jeremy recommend avoiding using Salix viminalis, where we're actively putting in willow now in those beds, especially near SSCs or SBAs?
Liam Hardy would be the correct person to ask. I would, like, if we're using it in filter beds, I don't really see a problem with it. It has a function there. And if I don't know enough about that. If viminalis works well, I don't see why there would be an issue. If there was a native substitute for it, then I would probably go for that. But that's one I'd probably run past Phelan Hardy.
And I think it's really okay to use trees as tools. You know, we considered it because some of our sites here in the West for the EIP were very exposed, and we considered putting forward a suggestion to the Forest Service to plant a native woodland, but with a ring of Sitka, which is very wind resistant, just maybe 3 or 4 trees deep, as a windbreak to allow the native species to get going, which could then be removed at a later date. I don't see any issue with using trees for their useful properties.
As long as they don't spread out into the.
Absolutely, and don't have invasive potential, Catherine. Absolutely, yeah.
Just a note, Ian has sent me a note, and I've just put it into the chat there about a conference from Woodlands of Ireland. They're hosting a conference 1st and 3rd of October on ancient woodlands of Ireland, distribution and condition, protective tree covers for catchment, and community involvement in forest management, which are very, I suppose, close to the topics that you're talking about.
And again,
and we'll be,
I don't know if you can
we'll
put
be
it,
at that
sorry,
if you spot us there.
Super, Jeremy. And again, I don't know if you can put it into the chat there. Questions relating to the forest reproductive material can be made directly to the Forest Service, and there's an email there. I don't know if you can throw it in, Pat, frm@agriculture.gov.ie. It's fairly straightforward anyway. So there is a lot going on in this area, as you said, Joe Garran, Woodlands of Ireland. We're all involved in that, and that's where we've worked together, Ray. And I mean, that's there is a lot going on the ground. So keep in touch, anybody that is. Sorry, Ray, you want to come back in?
There is, and I think it's worth saying, you know, to be fair to the Forest Service, it's been a real ropey couple of years. They've given us a lot of support in terms of supporting the nursery expansion, supporting the forestry promotion. I think there's 1.3 billion in the forestry budget between now and 27, I believe. No, sorry, the next 10 years is 1.3 billion. That's all. That whole amount of money is subject to people thinking it's in their best interest to applying for a license, and getting it. So I really think we need to move some of that money into the likes of this type of work that yourselves are doing, that we're doing, about advocating for the role of trees on farms. Another group doing great work is the Irish Agroforestry Forum. People just on the ground, as Jeremy did in the Plandy Boy project, you know, building awareness and building confidence amongst farmers that there's a role and a space for trees or woodlands on their farms.
Okay, well, believe it or not, our hour is up. I don't know where the time went. Listen, thank you very much to Ray and Jeremy. That was hugely interesting. We've had a huge number of questions in, and unfortunately we haven't managed to get to all of them. But maybe we'll pass some of them on to you, and we might try and get some follow-up. There was a good bit of discussion on the upland, and that introduces our topic for next week, where we have David McCracken, who is the head of the SRUC Mountain Research Centre, which is based in Western Scotland, which Catherine and I had the opportunity to visit earlier this year. So a really interesting place. And he'll be talking about environmental challenges and opportunities in the Scottish uplands. So thanking you again, Ray and Jeremy. Thanks for the questions, Catherine. You're going out now to your final of your series of events. So I presume you have to run out to that. No time for coffee.
Well, Michal Kelly is holding the fort. So
okay, you're in
good hands.
So thanks so very much to all, and until next week, thanks again also to Mary for supporting us, and we'll see you next week.
Thanks,
Bye-bye.
Pat.
Thanks, Ray and Jeremy.